Close your eyes and think of a sound that sends a shiver straight down your bones. A deafening roar, the pungent smell of petrol fumes and sawdust flying in the air. The image of a heavy-duty machine will instantly form in your mind, right? A chainsaw. In today's time, this machine is the ultimate symbol of destruction, brutality, and industrial power. We see it being used to clear forests, bring down massive trees in seconds, and even as a killer's weapon in terrifying Hollywood horror movies. Its spinning teeth and ear-piercing noise instill a strange fear inside us. But what if I told you that this image etched in your mind, this brutality, and this destructive identity is a complete lie? Would you believe it if I said that the machine you call a tool of devastation was actually created to save lives? This machine was not born to cut down any forest or to terrify humans. The real story of its invention is so horrifying, so deep, and so profoundly human that it will change your perspective forever. Mute the noise of this machine, forget the smell of petrol, and travel back millions of years in time with me. Are you ready to discover how human bones and the greatest tragedy of our evolution gave birth to this monster? We humans think that we are the most advanced and perfect species on this earth, right? But is that really true? Let's have a direct match of versus today. On one side, the animal kingdom and our millions of years old early human ancestors, and on the other, today's modern human. When you look closely at the animal world, giving birth seems like a very natural and seamless process. Have you ever seen a chimpanzee going to a hospital? A mare gives birth to a foal, and within minutes, her baby stands on its feet and starts running. In the wild, animals bring their offspring into the world with great ease, without any midwife, doctor, or painkillers. But when it comes to humans, why does the situation change completely? Think about it. Why has childbirth always been the biggest cause of death for women in the pages of human history? Have we become physically weaker? Not at all. The answer to this lies in that principle of evolutionary biology, which scientists call the obstetrical dilemma. This dilemma is not of today's making. Rather, it began millions of years ago when our early human ancestors left the branches of trees and started walking on the ground. Just imagine, when our ancestors in the jungles of Africa learned to stand and walk on two legs instead of four, what would have happened? This art of walking on two legs is called bipedalism in scientific terms. To balance gravity and to run fast, it was crucial for the shape of the human pelvis, hip bones, to change. Instead of being long and straight, our pelvis became bowl-shaped. This was a brilliant design for walking on two legs. But do you know who had to pay the heaviest price for it? Women. Because of this new structure, the birth canal, the passage through which a baby is born, became extremely narrow and tortuous. Nature solved our walking problem, but it created a new and terrifying trouble. And this trouble became even bigger when, after millions of years of evolution, we learned to use tools and cook food over fire. Due to cooked meat and better nutrition, the size of the human brain started growing rapidly. Our thinking and understanding brain kept becoming massive. Now just imagine this situation. On one hand, due to evolution, women's pelvic bones were becoming narrower, and on the other hand, due to that same evolution, the size of the unborn baby's head was constantly increasing. Was this not a terrifying biological design flaw? A baby with a massive head had to pass through an extremely tight and twisting passage. The human body got badly trapped in the midst of this contradiction. This is the biggest reason why human babies are born so helpless compared to other animals. Have you ever thought about what would happen if the baby spent a little more time in the womb and its head grew a little bigger? Its birth would become completely impossible. This biological compromise made the process of childbirth the most dangerous job in the world. This cycle continued for thousands of years. If a baby was in a breech position at the time of birth, or if its head was larger than the mother's pelvis, what would happen? That baby would get stuck in that narrow passage. And in that era, when there was no medical science, a stuck baby meant only one thing: an excruciating, agonizing, and painful death for both the mother and the baby. Now think, when humans were going through such horrific pain and helplessness, what was the way out? Would we surrender to nature? Not at all. This very helplessness and agony of humans gave birth to such a terrifying technique in the 18th century that later became the reason for the invention of the chainsaw. Time passed, and moving out of that primitive era of evolution, we reached the 18th century, Europe in the 1780s, a time when medical science was slowly advancing, but it was still full of darkness and cruelty. Can you feel yourself standing for a moment in a dark room of a house or a hospital in Scotland? There is a smell of sweat, blood, and terror in the air. In the yellow light of a candle, a woman is lying on a bed screaming in pain. She has been in labor pain for many hours, but the baby is not coming coming out. Her pelvic bones are so small that the baby's head is stuck inside. Just think, if such a situation arises in today's modern times, what happens? Doctors immediately perform a cesarean or C-section. An incision is made on the stomach, and the baby is safely taken out. But do you know what a C-section meant in the 18th century? A direct death warrant. There was no anesthesia or numbing medication at that time, nor were there antibiotics to stop infections. If a doctor cut open a woman's abdomen, she would either die immediately from the shock of the pain, or an infection would rot her entire body within a few days. Cutting the abdomen meant a 100% mortality rate. Now you tell me, what option did those doctors have? They couldn't cut the mother's abdomen, but they also couldn't leave the baby to die inside. What would a human do in this terrifying situation? Amidst this despair and helplessness began that bloody chapter of medical history called Symphysiotomy. Doctors applied a very terrifying logic. If we cannot cut the abdomen, then why don't we widen the bony passage itself where the baby is stuck? A woman's pelvis is connected at the front by a joint of cartilage and bone. The doctor's logic was that if they cut this joint through the middle with a saw, both bones of the pelvis would spring open like a rubber band, and the birth canal would suddenly widen. On paper, this looked like a perfect solution, right? But in reality, it was nothing less than hell. Can you imagine that pain? Without anesthesia, a straight knife or a bone saw was inserted between the vagina and the pelvis of a woman who was already going through the most horrific pain of her life. The doctor had to rub that stiff saw back and forth in that extremely tight space. This job was very slow, messy, and cruel. Because of the jerking motions surrounding delicate organs, the bladder and nerves would often get cut. It is impossible to even estimate the pain. This procedure did save the life of the stuck baby, but it left the mother crippled and in pain for the rest of her life. Was this right? Surgeons had realized that this method was not working. They were in search of a tool that could cut bone very rapidly and with precision, without giving jerks. They needed a ray of life in that room of death. The responsibility to stop this terrifying torture was taken up by two highly capable doctors from Scotland, John Aitken and James Jeffrey. The year was 1785. Both these doctors were researching how to make this bloody process of symphysiotomy the least painful. Have you ever seen the chain of an old-fashioned pocket watch? Those small metal pieces that are completely flexible despite being connected to each other. One day, the eyes of these two doctors fell on that same chain, and a revolutionary idea struck their minds. What if we make a saw that instead of being straight and rigid is flexible like a chain? They created a design in which small but extremely sharp saw-like teeth were fitted inside a flexible chain, and there were handles on both ends to hold it. The way this flexible saw worked was equally astonishing. The doctor would pass this toothed chain behind the woman's pelvic bone, and then, holding the handles with both hands, would rapidly pull the chain back and forth towards himself. Was this method better than before? Absolutely. Since the chain remained completely glued to the bone, it did not slip around and tear the flesh. But it still had one major flaw. Can you guess what that flaw was? It depended entirely on the doctor's physical strength. Cutting through the thick bone of a living human with the strength of one's hands was no easy task. The doctors would get drenched in sweat, and that writhing woman would still feel the horrific sensation of that rough chain rubbing back and forth in her bones. This was the world's first chainsaw, but it had yet to become a machine. It took almost half a century for this revolution to be completed. In the 1830s, a highly brilliant orthopedist was working in Germany, whose name was Bernhard Heine. Heine saw that flexible chain of Aitken and Jeffrey and immediately understood what it lacked. The missing element was continuous motion, meaning rotating continuously in a single direction. Anything that rubs back and forth will always create jerks. If a bone is to be cut like butter, the saw must rotate in one direction without stopping and at a very high speed. And do you know what this single thought gave birth to? The world's first true chainsaw, which Bernhard Heine named the Osteotome. If you look at a picture of the Osteotome, it will look like a miniature, non-motorized version of today's wood-cutting chainsaw. It had a long metal guide bar around which a toothed chain was wrapped. A crank handle was attached to the rear part of the machine. During surgery, the doctor would place this machine on the bone, and with the other hand, turn that crank very rapidly. As soon as the crank turned, the toothed chain would start running at a terrifying speed in a single direction. The result? A surgical miracle that shook the entire medical world of that era. Where earlier it took agonizing and lethal minutes to cut a bone, the Osteotome wrapped up that work in just a few seconds. The moment the crank rotated, the sharp teeth would slice right through the middle of the pelvic bone without giving any jerks. In that hellish experience, experience without anesthesia, the high speed of the Osteotome was nothing less than a blessing. This machine pulled countless women and children out from the jaws of death. A machine that was created to rip through human bones became the greatest medical miracle of human engineering. But was this miracle going to stop here? A machine that pulled thousands of women and children from the jaws of death. What should its end have been like? It should have been worshipped forever, right? But history is very strange. As the 19th century was drawing to a close, medical science made its biggest leap. Anesthesia like ether and chloroform were discovered. Scientists like Louis Pasteur and Joseph Lister introduced the germ theory to the world and found ways to prevent infections. Hospitals were no longer blood and pus-soaked slaughterhouses, but had become clean and safe places. Do you understand what this meant? It meant that cutting open a woman's abdomen to deliver a baby, that is a cesarean section, C-section, was no longer a death warrant. As soon as C-sections became safe, the horrific and bloody procedure of cutting women's pelvic bones, known as symphysiotomy, became obsolete overnight. Doctors could now safely extract the baby through the abdomen. As a result, that small, hand-cranked osteotome chainsaw was permanently removed from the surgical tray. It was cleaned and locked away in a cold glass box in a medical museum as a terrifying yet miraculous piece of history. Do you think a machine with such a lethal and foolproof design was meant to just gather dust in a museum? Absolutely not. Locked in that glass box, the osteotome wasn't dead. It was merely sleeping. And when this design awoke from its slumber in the next century, it wreaked a havoc around the world that no one had even imagined. The 20th century had begun, and the world stood on the brink of a massive turning point, the Industrial Revolution. Just imagine that era. New cities were being settled, miles of long railway tracks were being laid, deep mines were being dug, and the construction of giant ships was in full swing. What was human civilization hungriest for to build all these things? Wood. Boundless wood. But extracting this wood from forests was no child's play. At that time, lumberjacks used axes and the cross-cut saw, a long saw operated by two people, to fell massive trees. Do you know what lumberjacks jokingly called this saw? The misery whip. Pulling it back and forth all day would drain the water from a person's bones. Now you think about it, could human muscles satisfy this terrifying hunger of machines? Absolutely not. This work was so slow, exhausting, and dangerous that meeting the growing demand for wood became impossible. The industrial world was searching for a magical method that could cut trees at the same speed at which machines were operating in factories. And amidst this desperation, the eyes of some unknown engineer, or perhaps a lumberjack, fell upon that old surgical tool kept in the museum. Have you ever placed a human bone and a tree trunk under a microscope? If you look through the lens of science, there is a very strange and deep similarity in the internal structure of a human bone and a tree trunk. Both are extremely dense, fibrous, and made of strong layers of calcium or cellulose. A very dangerous question popped into that engineer's mind. If Bernhard Heine's toothed single-direction rotating chain could slice through the thickest and hardest bone of a living human like butter without getting stuck, what would happen if we scaled up that design 50 times? Wouldn't that machine rip through a giant oak or pine tree? This was a thought that laid the foundation for transforming a life-saving tool of medical science into the world's biggest industrial weapon. In 1905, a San Francisco inventor named Samuel J. Benz patented a very large, continuously rotating chainsaw to cut down giant redwood trees. The design was the same, only the scale had changed. Bone had now been replaced by wood, but human hands did not have enough strength to turn that massive machine. It needed a power that would never tire, and it found this power in the 1920s and 1930s, when engineers like Andreas Stiel and Emil Lerp in Germany added the very thing to this machine that made it forever ferocious: the gasoline engine. The early forestry chainsaws were not light and portable like today's. Just imagine, a 50 to 60 kilogram giant mechanical monster. They required at least two burly men to operate. One man handled the heavy gasoline engine, while the other held the opposite end of the guide bar. Now imagine that quiet delivery room where the osteotome was slowly cranked by a small handle, and then compare it with this new chainsaw. The quiet room was now replaced by an ear-shattering noise, a noise that frightened animals miles away, the smoke emitting from the machine, the pungent smell of petrol, and the sawdust flying in the air. The chainsaw had now completely taken the form of a monster. The teeth that used to be in millimeters had now turned into inches and were were rotating at a speed faster than a human hand. After World War II, another major change came to this machine that altered everything forever. Because of lightweight metals like aluminum developed during the war, the weight of the chainsaw decreased so much that it now required only one person, not two, to operate it. The one-man chainsaw brought literal devastation to the forests. And do you know what made this machine the most dangerous? An inventor named Joseph Buford Cox. One day, Cox was watching a timber beetle gnawing on wood. He carefully observed the beetle's jaws and bent the teeth of the chainsaw's chain into a C shape, exactly like that beetle's jaws. Isn't this ironic? We took inspiration from nature, the beetle's jaws, to destroy nature, the trees, and applied that design to a machine that was originally created to fight humanity's own evolutionary shortcomings. By the 1950s, the chainsaw had completely taken over the world's forests. Where lumberjacks previously took hours to cut down a tree, the same job was now being done in a few minutes, even seconds. But do you think humans would create such a fast, violent, and uncontrollable machine and its impact would remain limited only to wood? Absolutely not. This ear-shattering noise was now going to leave the forests and pierce straight into the depths of the human mind, and its consequences were going to be absolutely horrific. When you build a machine that is so fast, so violent, and so uncontrollable, can its impact remain limited only to wood and forests? Absolutely not. This ear-shattering noise was now going to leave the forests and pierce straight into the depths of the human mind. Have you ever noticed what happens inside your body when you see or hear a chainsaw running? Why does your nervous system instantly become alert? The answer lies in our primal psychology. When a chainsaw starts, your subconscious mind instinctively knows that whatever comes in front of this machine will be destroyed. That terrifying vibration running from your hands through the bones of your entire body, that ferocious toothed chain spinning naked without any guard, and its deafening noise. All of these combine to ring the alarm bells in the human brain with full force. A chainsaw is not an ordinary tool that makes you feel at peace when you look at it like you do when seeing a hammer or a screwdriver. It is a living, mechanical embodiment of violence. And do you think the modern world was just going to let go of this deepest psychological fear of humans? Hollywood had sensed this primal fear of humans very well. They understood that if this sound, this machine, was taken out of the forest and placed on a dark street or in a closed room, it could scare a person even more than their worst nightmare. The year 1974 was the turning point in the history of cinema and pop culture that forever changed the chainsaw's identity into a bloodthirsty monster. Have you ever heard the name the Texas Chainsaw Massacre? Director Tobe Hooper made a film that stole the sleep of the entire world. He put a horrifying mask made of human skin on the face of a massive man, named him Leatherface, and handed him a giant, noisy, motorized logging chainsaw. Just imagine that scene, when the audience in the darkness of the theater saw Leatherface running like a maniac with a chainsaw. That roar went through their ears straight into their souls. Could anyone have imagined that a machine could create so much terror on screen? That one film changed everything. The chainsaw was no longer just a woodcutting machine, it had become an invitation to death. After this, video games like Doom and movies like Evil Dead hammered this terrifying image into our brains. Ask anyone today, and for them, a chainsaw means either the destruction of a forest or the weapon of a psychopath. Isn't this strange? Modernity completely corrupted the meaning of this tool, the machine that was created to silence a mother's screams and bring a new life into the world. We gave it the status of a machine that distributes death and destruction. But when we weave the scattered threads of this whole story together, a very deep, disturbing, and almost poetic truth emerges. Just pause for a moment and look at this entire journey at once. From the initial struggle of our primitive ancestors standing on 2 feet millions of years ago to the helplessness of that bloody 18th century delivery room, and from there to today's modern forests and horrifying horror films. Don't you see a mirror of humanity in this that we often ignore? A very bitter truth of science is that tools have no morality or character of their own. Does an iron machine know what it is doing? No. A chainsaw doesn't know whether what is being cut between its sharp teeth is the pelvic bone of an agonizing mother so that a new life can take its first breath, or if it's the bark of a 100-year-old tree that will build someone's house, or if it is merely an instrument of death in a scary story. Machines are neither good nor bad. They are just a physical manifestation of the human mind, its desperation, and and its needs. We humans have always changed the meaning of things according to our needs, haven't we? This story reminds us of the biggest and most painful paradox of our evolution that separates us from all other animals. Nature made a very cruel bargain with us. It gave us the freedom to walk on two legs and a massive brain to understand the entire universe. But do you know who paid the heaviest price for this? Our women. Nature dictated that giving birth would be difficult for you, so what did we do? We forged iron teeth to tear open the chest of that very nature. This is the greatest attribute of the human race. When we become completely helpless, when pain and death surround us from all sides, then our brain comes up with the cruelest yet most genius solution. We built an extremely violent and terrifying machine to fight the structure of our own bodies, to defeat the design flaw of our own evolution. This is the greatest proof that humans can go to any lengths to survive. We can even build weapons of death to save lives. So now, the next time you hear the sound of a chainsaw running from afar, do not think of those masked killers from horror movies. Do not think of giant trees falling in the forests and flying sawdust either. Remember that silent history hidden behind that smell of petrol and that deafening roar. Remember those countless unnamed women who endured that extreme limit of pain without anesthesia in those dark and smelly rooms of the 18th century. Feel that agony through which the future of the human race has managed to reach this point today. The chainsaw is not a machine of destruction or death. If you read the pages of its history deeply, you will understand that this machine is actually the bloodiest, most ruthless, and most screaming testimony to the never-ending struggle of life. It is not just a tool, but the ultimate symbol of humanity's greatest victory in preserving its existence.